India Tonight. I'm Shibani Gharat, and with me is my colleague Sumita Karir, who's joining in from our Delhi studio. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a telephonic conversation with the US President Donald Trump this evening. Post the dialogue, PM Modi said on X that he had a warm and engaging conversation with President Trump. Now, the conversation between the two global leaders is significant at the time when the delegation of both the nations have been negotiating on the much-awaited trade deal. Sumita, let's quickly chat with you before we, speak to our guest. What do we gather from this conversation, and what more do we have on this particular chat?
Absolutely, Shibani. So this is the big breaking that we're getting for all our viewers who are just tuning in. The Prime Minister has spoken to President Donald Trump, and this sort of conversation, even though earlier on 5-6 occasions the two leaders have spoken. But what makes this conversation particularly important and critical is the fact that the timing of this conversation at which it has happened. Now, remember, the two leaders review the progress as far as India-US comprehensive global strategic partnership is concerned. And of course, as far as details are concerned, the leaders exchange views on expanding cooperation and not just trade, but critical technologies, energy, defense, and security as well. And both the leaders agreed to work closely to address the shared challenges and advance common interests. In fact, the Prime Minister had a telephone conversation. That's essentially what both the sides spoke about. They also reviewed the progress in the comprehensive global strategic partnership, and they expressed satisfaction at the strengthening of the bilateral cooperation across all domains. So the big takeaway as far as this conversation is concerned is that it was not just centered around trade, even though we do have a delegation that is currently in New Delhi. They've held 2 days of talks with India's Commerce Secretary Rajesh Agarwal, besides, of course, meeting a whole host of officials from the Indian government, including India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri as well. A meeting also was held between Deputy USTR Rick Switzer and his team, and of course with India's Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal as well. Now, PM and President, they underlined the importance of sustaining momentum in shared efforts to enhance bilateral ties and trade. And of course, both of them exchanged cooperation, their views on exchanging cooperation in critical technologies, energy, defense, and security. So a whole host of things were essentially touched upon. And to dissect this further, we are now joined in by Anjali Prasad. She's a former envoy to the WTO, Ratan Srivastava, who's a fellow of the Atlantic Council. And let me also welcome on the show Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh, who's a fellow at the ORF. Thank you very much, Ms. Prasad, Mr. Srivastava, and Mr. Ghosh for joining us tonight on India Tonight. Let me just quickly ask your first thoughts, Ms. Prasad, on this conversation. Does this essentially mean that tonight on Truth Social, there could be an announcement as far as trade is concerned, given the fact, like I stated, that the timing of this conversation is very critical, it's very important?
Yeah, thank you. I would draw your attention to the Commerce Minister's statement saying that no deal can be concluded in haste and there can be no deadline. So this is the crux of the matter. The conversation between the two heads was more in generalities, and positive noises were made. But the crucial point to note is the Commerce Minister's statement that no deal can be concluded in haste, and we cannot have a deadline for such negotiations.
Yes. Sticking with you, ma'am, with both PM Modi and Trump reaffirming India's and US global strategic partnership and vowing to sustain the momentum on the bilateral trade, do you read this leader-level engagement is actually a reset, a reassurance, or do you purely look at it as an optics, in this politically complex moment for trade negotiations?
See, this is not necessarily optics. We don't know the details of the so-called good offer, which President Trump has termed it. but I think they are genuinely making an attempt to arrive at something that is mutually beneficial and balanced and equitable for both sides. But the Prime Minister has, of course, sent out positive signals, and so has President Trump. However, I would make a different point here, and that is that no, I don't know whether this issue has at all been placed on the table, but we have to start from a status quo ante. We cannot be negotiating from the raised tariffs and penalties. We should be
Right.
negotiating from the bindings in the WTO. No bilateral deal or any sort of trade deal can be negotiated on the basis of,
Right, ma'am.
unilaterally raised tariffs and penalties, so-called penalties.
Absolutely,
Because
ma'am. You raise a very
these
fair
don't
point,
bind.
and that is essentially India and including various other nations have also spoken about the fact that most of these institutions, whether it's the WTO or several others, they need reform, and which is why all nations need to come together to establish a rules-based order. So thank you very much for your opening comments. Let me also go across to Mr. Ratan Srivastava and Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh. To you, Mr. Srivastava, let me also get in your thoughts on this conversation that transpired between the Prime Minister and the President. This, of course, is not the first conversation that has happened this year. This at least is the fifth or the sixth conversation. But in your opinion, do you think that a breakthrough would have happened in trade talks because of the fact that we did hear from the CEA, C. Ananta Nageshwaran as well, and he did hint at a breakthrough which perhaps would happen in March next year. So what is your anticipation and your understanding of what really transpired between the Prime Minister and the President, and if a breakthrough is indeed something that can be expected?
So thank you for this, and indeed very good questions. First of all, if we take that the trade talks, we have had multiple rounds, but this trade talk which has happened now with Rick Switzer is important because Rick Switzer joined the White House just in October, and he looks after Asia, textiles, investments. These are the portfolios that he handles over there. And his coming to India is probably a positive signal into how the talks are progressing, in addition to the discussions that the AUSTR, Assistant USTR, Mr. Lynch has been having with his Indian counterparts. We must also take into account the statement made yesterday by the USTR, Mr. Greer, saying that India has given some of the best offers possible till now that we have received from other countries as well. So this is the best offer that we have got, but still India remains a tough nut to crack. Probably the reason he says that is the sticking points on agriculture, dairy, meat that we are not ready to open yet because I think we are not ready for it, and the market is not mature enough to absorb those kind of products in the market. In addition, there should have been some indication by the Trump administration for removing the additional 25% tariffs that have been imposed on India for buying the Russian oil. While we continue to buy, we have reduced the quantities that we are buying. But are we the only country which is buying? China is buying. He has not put additional tariff over there. Europe is buying a whole lot of energy. There are no additional tariffs over there. But India had been singled out. So I think some discussion, some indication from the president's office or from the USTR team on that would have been a very welcome signal. However, the very fact that he came here as one of the first ports of call, and he has had very fruitful discussions, as we have been told, with his counterparts. And he has also met Mr. Misri, our foreign secretary. So that is an added dimension. We must also remember that at this point in time, when this discussion is going on with the Commerce Ministry, we also had Alison Hooker, who's the Undersecretary of State at the Department of State, also visiting India, meeting her counterparts in the Ministry of External Affairs. So I think there's a comprehensive discussion going around over here. And this has been done at the officials level. But the political leadership has to take a call on what needs to be the next steps in sort of solving this dilemma that the elusive trade deal has been giving to us. So that is where it is. On the second part of your question about what has transpired probably between the political leadership of President Trump and Prime Minister Modi.
Absolutely.
Although the tweet is very, I would say, encouraging, but a tweet is a tweet. It's
Yes.
not an official. It's not an official document.
Yes,
So
tweet
it
is a
was
tweet. It's
encouraging.
not an official document. But having said that, thank you for waiting, Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh. But here, with both leaders agreeing to deepen the cooperation in critical technologies like energy, like defense, how should India balance, their short-term tariff pressures with long-term economic upside of deeper integration with US-led technology and supply chain ecosystems, according to you?
At the very outset, let me just put this clear that the tariffs have not impacted the macroeconomy of India, first of all. And that is extremely prominent. In fact, if you look at the GDP growth rate, 8.2%. I mean, despite and India is the fastest growing major economy. Consumption, of course, had a major role to play, 7.9% growth in consumption. But at the same time, what is extremely interesting is that even the exports actually grew. Overall exports of India, we had record exports, in fact, in the Q2 of this particular year. But what has actually worked for India as far as the Q2 is concerned? Of course, the tax rationalization. We had, the very, very purchasing power of the economy has increased because of the income tax rationalization that took place in the budget and the GST rationalization. Now, one needs to understand one very critical component. Indian growth story is not an export-driven growth story. It's not like China. We have a consumption-driven growth story. So, and this has largely been driven by private domestic consumption. So, even if we have 50% tariff imposed from 27th of August, if I'm getting the date correct, that's not going to impact the short-term or the long-term growth at this point in time, given the fact that it is the buoyancy and the robustness of the domestic economy which is promoting the growth. So on the other side, when we talk about the partnerships as far as energy and critical minerals and the other domains are concerned, definitely that is going to, any kind of partnership is going to augur well for India. There is no doubt. India is already having a much more diversified portfolio when it comes to its this entire GDP is concerned. And more importantly, if you look at its,
Right.
as far as India-US trade talks are concerned, this is not the only trade talk that we are happening. We have already signed the trade pact with UK.
Absolutely.
We have been signing a host of trade pacts. We are getting into the in talks with the European Union. So we have already diversified our portfolio in terms of
Right,
the free
Mr.
trade
Ghosh.
agreements. We are going to get into we are in talks with as far as IMEC is concerned.
Absolutely.
If that works out, that's going to be a major game changer for India. So that is where
Absolutely,
India stands.
Mr.
US is
Ghosh,
not
you've
the
made a
only player
very
in this
valid
game.
point, and India has been diversifying not just in terms of trade, exports, but even FTAs as well. And even as we speak, Minister Goyal has stated that we are very close to reaching an agreement with New Zealand and, of course, with Oman as well. And, of course, we'll be closely watching all of those developments, but would request Mr. Srivastava, Mr. Ghosh, and Ms. Prasad to hold on. And we have to look at what Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal said today in Mumbai. He sent out a very strong message. He said that India is not going to negotiate with a deadline. He, in fact, went on to say that the US team should sign on the dotted line if they are indeed so happy with what the Indian side has presented them in terms of the package that the USTR was speaking about. Let's listen into that a bite first, then we'll continue with our discussion.
Give it some time. Let's not rush into things and never negotiate with a deadline. Negotiation should always be with a sense of urgency, but never in haste. I can only say that negotiations are progressing well. We've had substantive discussions over several rounds of negotiations. In the past, I think 5 rounds have happened. The current visit is not a negotiating round. Current visit is a new deputy USTR who has joined about 3 months ago. It's his first visit to India. We're getting to know each other. He's at the Commerce Secretary level, Vice Minister, so they're all getting to know each other well. He met me also. We had very good substantive discussions. But I've often said on record that a deal is only done when both sides stand to benefit. And I don't think we should ever negotiate with deadlines or hard stops, because you tend to make mistakes then. His happiness is very much welcome, and I do believe that if they are very happy, they should be signing on the dotted line.
Piyush Goyal stating that we should never negotiate with deadlines and hard stops. Also, let's listen in to the voices of US representatives and what Executive Director Dhruva Jaishankar said.
Are facing challenges around tariffs, both here in the United States and in India. These tariffs are damaging India's economy and also hurting American businesses and consumers. Just last week, I heard from a fifth-generation family-owned company in Washington state that relies on agricultural products from India that can't be sourced at scale in the United States. They told me that these tariffs are the greatest threat to their business in over 120 years, and they're looking at either downsizing or offshoring their production to meet increased costs.
Singling out India for 50% tariffs, one of the highest rates imposed on any country, has effectively derailed leader-level meetings between our two countries. Yet the 25% tariff rate that has attributed to India's imports of Russian oil look pretty pointless. $1,000 fee on H-1B visas, 70% of which are held by Indians, is a rebuke of the incredible contributions Indians have made to science, technology, medicine, and arts in the United States.
India as a temporary or transactional partner. Still, we must view this moment with clear eyes. India knows these risks firsthand. Since 2020, Chinese forces have killed Indian soldiers on their shared border. India has responded decisively.
Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. However, this considerable progress in consolidating the relationship is now at a political standstill.
All right, so a string of comments that have been made by, of course, officials from the United States, of course, by ORF's America head, Mr. Dhruva Jaishankar as well. And, of course, we'll try and dissect all of those bites one after the other. But let me go back to Minister Goyal's comments this evening, and let me take those comments across to Mr. Ghosh. Mr. Ghosh, when Minister Goyal said that if indeed the USTR is so happy about the package, then why don't they sign on the dotted line? So what really explains this commentary that's been coming in from the United States side, particularly from USTR Jamieson Greer, who seems to be suggesting that the package is excellent, that India has decided to significantly open its market and we're giving them a whole lot of market access. Is that another attempt to pressurize India into accepting what the United States wants of India?
To a certain extent, yes. That is exactly how I would like to interpret this particular comment. And India is playing it very rationally, I must say. Because let's face this, what is happening in the process, in the process of imposing these tariffs is, it's not a damage as far as India is concerned. It is primarily going to affect the US consumers. Because end of the day, these tariffs are passed on to the US consumers and they are going to pay an extra price. And that is what is happening. So the consumer surplus in the process is going to decline. This is going to lead to a decline in the consumption demand in the process. And in the medium run, I can assure you this is what has happened. When you raise tariff rates, if you are largely an economy which is dependent on imports for your domestic consumption, is that consumption keeps on hitting your GDP. A lower consumption keeps on essentially hitting your GDP growth rate. And that is what US is going to encounter, in fact, in the medium run, may not be in the very short run itself. Now, as far as India is concerned, we are not really that because we are largely a private consumption-driven economy, and in most cases, we have diversified our consumption basket. In fact, as far as the growth forces, as far as consumption and other domains are concerned. So that is precisely why we are in a better position to sustain that growth rate. And to a certain extent, that is why, in fact, you will find the ADB has also revised the growth projections of this particular year to around 7.6%.
Well, over to you, Anjali Prasad. I want to ask you, in the light of the recent comments by, the US lawmakers, and also in the light of, Modi and Trump reaffirming the need to sustain momentum. How can negotiators actually help bridge the gap between, this top-level political goodwill and the on-ground hard reality of hardened bargaining positions?
Yes. Now, the first and most important thing is that we must ask for a status quo ante. Since the Commerce Minister has said that this is not a negotiating round, we still have a chance to do that. That is number one. The second is that national interest has to be topmost in our negotiating format. We cannot be offering them agriculture and allied products the way they want it, because this is a most sensitive sector for India. So therefore, we cannot say that, we just need to make them happy and forget about our national interest. The third and important point which I would like to flag is that this is a bilateral trade deal, not in the sense of a free trade agreement, because that is very different. Whatever we are doing today will have to be multilateralized as per WTO law. When we multilateralize, whatever tariff concessions we intend to give to the US, the same concessions become available to all other members of the WTO, because the principle of the most favored nation treatment kicks in. Now, if that be the case, we have to analyze the implications of so many other, countries benefiting or using these tariff concessions. So it's not such a simple thing. It doesn't remain closeted between India and the US. It has to be multilateralized at the end of the day, because we are members, both of us are members of the WTO. So how are we going to do that? That is another very, very complex analysis, which I definitely presume has been done in government. And the fact that the minister is saying that we cannot do it in haste, we may be looking at it with some urgency, but it has to be done very carefully. It is for all these reasons that we have to be very careful. National interest has to be paramount. Agriculture and allied products are extremely sensitive for us, and we must do it from a position of status quo ante, not with these increased tariffs and penalties, because that is most unfair and most inequitable. So I think when we go back to the
Absolutely,
table,
ma'am.
we are not doing that currently. When we go back to the table, I hope government will put all this on the table.
Absolutely, ma'am. And we have maintained very firm red lines as far as sectors that are sensitive to us is concerned, and not just with the United States, but several other countries across the globe with which we are doing these FTAs and other trade deals. And of course, that's been, reciprocated well as well from the other countries. But you made a very valid point about, multilateralizing these deals basis WTO norms. But who's going to ensure that, given the fact that the USTR or the United States is clearly not following those rules? Let me come to you, Mr. Ghosh. Mr. Ghosh, when we talk about this deal and, of course, these calls that have been made between the Prime Minister and the President, this is not the first time, like I stated. There were earlier calls as well. We were very close to a deal in July this year as well. And, of course, back then, there was this sword of 25% additional tariffs that was hanging, and the fact that, there could be additional tariffs on India. But how critical is this deal at this point in time for the United States, given what it's seen with other nations with which it has struck deals? So whether it's China, for instance, or Malaysia, for instance, could you put that into context for our viewers on how critical is this deal at this point in time for the United States, vis-a-vis how important it was for them in July?
See, to a certain extent, as I understand, most of the commodities that are exported to the US from India, or whatever US imports from India, many of those commodities are what we call the given commodities. Given in the sense, even if the price increases to a certain extent, I mean, the consumers still buy them. If to a certain extent, say it happens in the case of pharmaceuticals, where in fact the tariffs were not there, they were exempted. Now, when it comes to certain commodities like gems and jewelry, right, it so happens that the class of consumers who consume that, they will consume that whatever be the price level. So that makes it that the demand to a certain extent largely inelastic. But in cases, I really don't know what Trump is going to do with the rice, which has suddenly came up, in fact, yesterday. But in cases of certain commodities, there will be an impact, especially, in fact, in commodities which have largely an inelastic demand, which also the consumer really feels like buying, but might not be in a position because of a sudden rise of 50% price. So, because ultimately this tariffs are not going to be absorbed by the importers as such. They will most definitely pass it on to the consumer. So, in that case, this is going to have a large impact, in fact, on the very consumer surplus or the consumer well-being. So, in the process, they will stop consuming these commodities. And US, let's also face this. US also has a substantial component of their gross domestic product or the national income contributed by consumption. It's a consumption-driven economy. So if there is some kind of a cut in consumption, a reduction in consumption, that is going to affect the US GDP. And that is bound to happen. So in that sense, of course, there will be India is, but let's remember, India is not the largest, not one of the bigger players in terms of as far as exports to US is concerned. It's China. China is the largest player. They also have a substantial amount of tariff imposed on them. Already the 25% prevails. We don't know what is going to happen as far as the implications or how far the trade war is going to get extended. But in any case, that has already affected the US consumers. So, I mean, whatever is being done in the name of MAGA or making America great again, or suppose insulating the U.S. economy and in certain cases, providing a certain amount of protection to the U.S. industry. I don't think that this is going to have any kind of positive effect on the U.S. economy. Also, because let's remember one more thing, that large components of the factors of production in terms of whether it's critical minerals or whatsoever, they are also imported in the US. And in certain cases, these are also going to be impacted. So the entire, if the factor cost goes up,
Yes.
that is also going to affect the entire production cost.
Yeah.
So this is a great disservice to the US economy that is being rendered by the present dispensation.
Yes, and that has been a conversation that has been brought to light by many people. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mr. Ghosh, Mr. Srivastava, and also Anjali Prasad for joining us today for this discussion. Thank you very much.